What is going on? What makes a sampler great? In this video, we are going to look at 7 things that make a sampler great. But first, I'd like to invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our sampler channel. And with that, let's get to it. All right, number 1. Control on the sample input. What do I mean by this? Your analog to digital converter is the first thing that your analog signal will see on its way into a sampler. If you're able to control that signal internally within your sampler, you'll be able to customize your sound far more than you would on a sampler that doesn't allow you to do so. And to demonstrate this, we'll use a familiar piece of audio from our Can You Tell the Difference video from the ASR10. Following that, we'll use the EPS16 Plus in mono at 22 kHz, but we will remove the anti-aliasing filter, something that the ASR10 does not have as an option, and we'll see what results we get. Now with the anti-aliasing filter removed, we're able to not only retain high frequency information, which depending on your sample rate you may hear or not hear, but most importantly, we introduce aliasing, which often presents itself as grit or dirt and can be easily compared to sampling at a reduced bit rate, with the benefit of having all the dynamics there. As we heard in this audio, it was a little bit fuzzy, a little bit more gritty than normal. It's an amazing sampling tool, especially when sampling at lower sample rates. You get all types of ghosting, all types of artifacts, all types of junk. Not to mention, when you compress a signal like this, you really put those artifacts in the forefront. But sampling, having control on your sample inputs, such as an anti-aliasing filter, is an amazing tool. Number 2, the filter. Now, the filter is probably the most important tool you have on a sampler in terms of shaping the sound of your samples. How that filter sounds on its own contributes largely to what the sampler sounds like. So still staying with the EPS16 Plus, let's see how its filter changes the sound of the drum sample we've been using. And we'll follow up with the EMU ESI 4000, a sampler that's regarded for its filter. Right, so 2 different sounding types of filters, even though they're similar, a different type of feel from the same sample. And just to note, both samples are mono at 22 kHz sampling rate. All right, number 3. Ease of use. This is huge. The top samplers we have in history available to us today have reached that status largely in part because they were easy to use. The Akai S950, the EMU SP1200, both wildly popular samplers and extremely simple to use. And stepping back a little bit further in history, an amazingly simple sampler to use is the Akai S612. Let's listen to how easily we can edit this drum sample with the Akai. So immediate, nothing to do, the controls are right there. And just for fun, let's look at the Octatrack, which can do the same thing very easily. And yet, the Octatrack is not so easy to use. But on the flip side of that, while this is easy for the Akai S612, we don't have that much time. Listen to how short the sample is we're working with. Right, which brings us to number 4, which is dual fold. Modulation and memory. A sampler's ability to retain samples in memory is huge. The more memory we have, the more samples we can control and have available at any given time. So memory and the ability to save that memory through storage is a big key. Also, modulation. The ability for a sampler to behave as a synthesizer, meaning that anything you can do on a synthesizer in regards to modulating sounds, repatching sounds, reorganizing sounds, looping sounds, anything that has to do with synthesis in regards to samples is what we're categorizing as modulation here. If you have a sampler that can easily take a sound and switch it up into anything else quickly, that is a huge trait. So with the Octatrack now, let's look at what we can do quickly in terms of modulation. Right? So modulation represents power and the ability for your sampler to perform and accomplish whatever you set out to do. On to number 5. The sound. A sampler that sounds good goes a long way on so many levels. A sampler that sounds good causes you to want to work with it more. And since a lot of sample users make their entire music within a sampler that sounds good really becomes important. So let's listen to the same drum loop, I know, coming from the ASR-X, an absolutely amazing sounding sampler. All right. So lastly, 2 honorable mentions, counting as 6 and 7. Number 6. Ins and outs. A sampler that can interface well with other equipment in your studio puts it in high demand. Let's take a look at the back of the Roland VP9000. As you can see, there's tons of ins and outs, ADAT digital outputs, SPDIF digital outputs, 2 forms of SCSI, input level control. There's everything on this sampler needed for the time it came out. Now let's look at the Akai S612. Not much, MIDI and a mono line output. So there's only so much we can do with a sampler like that as far as integration without other peripheral gear. Number 7, the workstation. As samplers became more available as a standalone unit that you can produce on from beginning to end, the concept of the workstation began to emerge. So samplers went from just a piece of rack gear as an optional piece to the main piece of your studio. And with that came samplers that had sequencers, keyboards or drum pads, and all types of compositional tools in order to complete an entire song without having to go elsewhere until the recording process. As we can see with the Akai MPC 2500, with a sampler like this, you are able to perform, record, do everything in one standalone hardware unit. No peripheral devices needed. So with all of that said, if you were to buy a sampler with any 4 of the 7 traits listed in this video, you would have a great hardware sampler on your hands. And it also speaks to why we often use more than one sampler, because what we consider greatness in each of those areas is subjective. And overall, we may never find a sampler that does all these 7 things great. And hopefully this video can be a guide for you if you're in the market for a hardware sampler to kind of check off the points on what you may want in your sampler. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you liked and learned something today, subscribe to us here on YouTube. I will catch you on the next one. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Peace.